everyone. This is the Life of Gem live video podcast, season 4. Can you believe it? Episode 2. Writers on Writing, where I, Gem, Juanita Manta, interview writers in my community, some of my favorite people who have books. We record this live to video just so everyone knows, and you can always find the video on juanitaemance.com or on my Life of Gem Facebook page. But we are now also available audio only on Apple Podcasts. So you can listen to the audio about 1 week after the video airs. I call this episode Writing with Style, and you will see why. Today we have a really big treat. We have one of my favorite people, former librarian, writer, a wonderful editor, book reviewer, Victoria Waddle. She has 2 books that are currently published, Acts of Contrition, published by Nietos Press, and most recently, a book that's dear to my heart, The Mortality of Dogs and Humans. This was published by Bamboo Dart Press. And then she also has a YA novel coming out from Inlandia. I'm going to read Victoria's bio. Give us a wave, Victoria. She's here. And then she's going to read a short excerpt of her work from Acts of Contrition. And then we'll chat and get into the meat of the interview. And stick around till the end because we're going to be giving away a book or 2. So, Victoria Waddle is a retired librarian, a Pushcart Prize nominated writer with work published in numerous literary journals and anthologies, including Best Short Stories from the Saturday Evening Post, Great American Fiction Contest. A collection of her short fiction, Acts of Contrition, is available from Nietos Press. Her chapbook, The Mortality of Dogs and Humans, is available from Bamboo Dart Press. Her upcoming YA novel will be published by Inlandia, and that is yet untitled. She's working on the title. She is formerly the managing editor of the journal Inlandia, A Literary Journey. She helped to establish a yearly teen issue. Her experience as a high school English teacher and librarian, combined with the current battle over book banning, influences her current projects. She also recently started a Substack, which we'll talk about, called Be a Cactus, and the link is in the comments, but basically it's www.victoriawaddle.substack.com. She also has a website, victoriawaddle.com. Welcome, Victoria. It is such an honor to have you.
Yay. It's an honor. Yay, thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm really excited about it. So thank you so much.
We already have a lot of viewers. I'm going to shout out a couple of them. Rachel Meenan.
Yay,
Hi, Rachel. And then Carol Erickson. Thank you for tuning in live. And like I said, this will be available on Apple Podcasts within a week. So, Victoria, I really love the book Acts of Contrition. Frank Kearns, who both published both of our books from Nietos Press. He published this book, Acts of Contrition. It's a beautiful collection of short stories. I really want people to hear your unique voice. Can you read us a portion to start out the podcast?
Okay, yeah, thanks. I'm going to, what I want to do is just read a portion from one of the stories, it's the last story. And the story is called You Must Remember This. And it was actually the one that was selected by the Saturday Evening Post as among Best American Fiction. And it's, a little longer, and I don't want to take too long. So I'm going to read out of the middle of it. So let me just tell you that the beginning of the story, it's basically about a really large dysfunctional family in the 1960s, 1970s. They have 5 girls and 2 boys in a really small house. And the main character, the protagonist, has a little friend named Joni who has like a Barbie dream house. I thought I'd read the Barbie thing today just because everybody's so in Barbie. So read a little Barbie today. The Barbie dream house. And of course, our protagonist, she doesn't have a Barbie dream house. Their house is too small to have big toys like that because there's so many people in it. So she likes to play at Joni's. And Joni's mother is named Bobby, and Bobby has been divorced twice, and now she's married 3 times, and she's moving out of the neighborhood. And all the women gossip about her. They think that, her life is going down the tubes. But the protagonist as a child doesn't see it this way. She thinks that her life is really cool. So that's kind of what happens before, is that you just think it's really dysfunctional, and a lot of mention of things that you would recognize if you know anything about the 60s and 70s, like Bewitched, Batman, etc., going on there. Okay, so here we are with our protagonist kind of in the middle of the story. She's talking with her sister Alice, who's trying to help her with a zipper that is stuck on her clothes. The zipper on my dress was caught, and Alice was afraid she'd break it, so I wandered out to the kitchen to get help. My mother and Blanche were having glasses of beer with Ritz and Cheese Whiz, their celebratory mood mellowed by the buzz of the alcohol. Blanche called to me, "I'll help you with your zipper." And then, "You're so pretty." She patted her lap, and I moved to sit in it. She had no problem pulling the fastener open, but instead of setting me back on the ground, she pulled me closer to her and wrapped me in her arms. "This one could be mine with those eyes and that hair." My mother smiled. Blanche wore perfume, and I leaned into her for a better whiff, her scent as bold as the exotic flowers of her muumuu, blue, red, and fluorescent pink, outlined in black. My senses overwhelmed, I felt faint and yet safe, nearly falling back onto Blanche, into the warm tenderness of her ample breasts and soft belly, sinking into the marshmallow pillow of her thighs. This is a hug. And then they lied to me. Blanche's husband didn't just like her face. He could wrap himself up like this every night. But the lie was something even greater than nighttime caresses, too big for me to figure out. I only knew that the sensation was like Bobby's lips on my cheek. That is, if I could somehow have lips all over my body. I curled up and then remained still, alert to the pleasure puzzle. When Blanche said it was time for her to go, she put her hands under my arms to lift me off her lap. Though I knew it was futile, I snuggled deeper. My mother, embarrassed, said, "You're too old for that." Another lie. I now knew that she couldn't be trusted. When we returned to Bobby's house, it was for a New Year's Eve party. I was young enough to find this exciting and begged my parents to go. My siblings stayed home. It was clear that Mary thought watching the younger kids was a drag, but that going to a party with our parents was worse. Joni and I played in her room for a while, but she had only one Ken doll, so we couldn't make two couples. We became bored and decided to watch the adults. There were several that I knew. Blanche was there, and I might have worked a stealth campaign to end up in the electric blanket of her lap, except that a new woman had caught my attention. Rachel was Bobby's niece. She had on a miniskirt that tickled her butt and the coolest black boots I had ever seen. In front, they rode up over her knees, and if she wanted to, she could have crawled for blocks and come up without a scratch. She too reminded me of Raquel Welch, such was her beauty. I wondered if I had heard her name wrong, if she was Raquel incognito. Of course, everyone had noticed Rachel, but she mostly smiled on my father, that distinguished Superman, that local Clark Kent. I found a napkin on a tray in the kitchen and read the party joke printed on it. I went back out to the living room to pile up some chips and dip. When I saw my mother, I pointed at my napkin and asked her, "What did one eye say to the other eye?" My mother grabbed my wrist and I winced. When she pulled me next to her, I said, "Between you and me, something smells," in the hope that the punchline would ease a tension that seemed to have no source. She cocked her head at me the way parents do when their children are wise beyond their years. Then she looked at the napkin and her irritation returned. She had a clear drink in her hand. "Put water in this," she hissed. My father was talking to Rachel, but when he saw my mother pass off his glass, he called to me to have Bob, who was in the kitchen refreshing his own drink, give him some vodka since my mother wouldn't do it. He laughed in a way I'd never heard before. In fact, everything about him was something I didn't recognize. His happy feet that tapped out the rhythm of the song on the stereo, his tone of voice, which my mother responded to as if to a slap. "You take that glass and put water in it," she whispered to me. "Dad will get mad at me." "Do what I tell you to do." Caught between them, I decided to obey my mother. When I handed the glass to my dad, he sipped and then tapped his finger on the center of my head as though it were a spring-loaded trap door. I ran away, back to Joni's bedroom and the single Ken doll. I played Barbies until people started blowing their paper horn and getting ready for the midnight countdown. A man I didn't know handed me a horn and a noisemaker. I saw that my father was still with Rachel. My mother stared at him, and her eyes welled with tears. He came over to her just in time for the midnight countdown. I had never seen him drunk this way, wasted, but his crossing the room gave me a moment of being grounded, a sense of truce between my parents. When the clock struck the hour, my father kissed my mother. It was the first time I had seen him kiss her, and the first time I had seen him perpetrate violence upon her, grabbing her cheeks between his thumb and forefinger and forcing her mouth open, a punishment. Others saw this as well. Rachel looked on, and a smile slid up one side of her mouth. She had beaten my mother in some sort of game. As the revelers were still screeching and wishing one another a happy new year, my mother grabbed her coat and walked out to the car. I followed. When we climbed into the station wagon, my father was at the wheel. My mother didn't drive, wasn't even licensed. We peeled out down the street and then on to Liberty Boulevard. The wagon slipped over the yellow dividing line, and speeding through the hills, brakes squealing, we ricocheted back through the curves. I cowered in the back seat and then decided my best chance of survival would be on the floor. Every turn felt like it would sling my gut over the hillside. I gagged and then retched as quietly as possible, swallowing back the clot of potato chips that lodged itself in my throat, worried that if my father smelled vomit, he might drive over the cliff just to punish me. Thus began the decade of the Raquels.
I so love that story, and I'm so glad you read from it. The YA voice in that story is so strong, and I called this episode "Writing with Style," and that's what I mean by writing with style, because it's like you have such a distinctive voice, and you have all these different stories, but yet we still hear your voice in all these different characters. And just so everyone knows, Tim Hatch is here. Hey Vic, hey Jem, he said. Jill is here. Hi Jill. She said that was intense. And Elizabeth Gorbett Frost is here too, and she says, "You go, girl." So let's talk about that story and in that voice. So this young girl, you use a lot of nostalgia, starting with the title. You must remember this, right? That's a song title. A kiss is just a kiss. A sigh is just a sigh.
Mm-hmm.
As time goes by, and so was that one of your goals in this story? Was to enhance the stylistic tone of the piece by using these little images that we can just latch on to, like the Barbie doll, Raquel Welch, the bicycle, the idea of being in a car with your parents. Like, talk about that. Like, I
A
also want to know
station wagon.
yeah, the station wagon, how you wrote these stories. Like,
Yeah.
do you channel? Do you plot them out? Like, give us a little sense of how you do this.
I like, I was thinking recently of saying I like the short story writer George Saunders, very famous and brilliant, and he's probably the best short story writer alive in America today. And he has a story club on Substack. And one of the things I like that he was talking about, so, writers have, everybody's limited as being human in their time, in their understanding, in their mind. And they have certain themes that speak to them. And he said, don't be afraid to go into these themes again and again, because it's like a vein of gold in the rock, right?
Yeah,
Go
yeah.
back to that vein, go back to that precious metal, and keep doing it. And so I think that's what I do a lot. And so a lot of people have commented, oh my gosh, there's a lot of like joking around about like religion and stuff in here.
Yeah.
And there's and of course all of the books are about female characters that get a little bit of a raw deal. And then how do they relate to that? How do they get beyond it, past it? And some of them do it in very funny ways. And this one is actually, she gets out of it in a pretty funny kind of like way. But I thought I did really, in this particular story, want to look at, and I know it might be, some people are younger and weren't alive around in the 60s or the 70s, but just might recognize some of those things, that they watch Batman every week, and that she's thinking when they have to go to church at the gym, because they're building the church and they're in the public gym and the basketball hoop is over the priest. She's really afraid that the net is going to come down like it does on Batman and Robin and grab him, and oh my God, what is he going to do? The priest. is he going to be saved by God? And so these kind of like weird questions that adults wouldn't think of. And so trying to get into the child's mind, or the fears that children have. And so I thought that was really
also that idea of the male in control, right? And the woman being more subservient, watching their husband flirt, that kind of Mad Men motif. Ruthie Marlene, who's a wonderful writer who wrote Agave Blues, whoa, did our generation all have parents like this? And I think there's something is like that romantic view. You call your dad the local Clark Kent. In the story, the narrator does. This is not memoir, it's fiction. So I don't want to mix up whose voice this is. You do write memoir too, and we're going to talk about your memoir, The Mortality of Dogs and Humans, which is more essay based. But that idea of the male in charge, right? And the female, and also in the Catholic Church, right? There is a lot of religious imagery. And the only other person that I know that does this as well as you do is Jo Scott Coe, who I love her work. And she taught me how to use religion to set tone. And what is the religious aspect of this? What are you trying to say? Both with the title, the imagery of the heart, which almost has like a Frida Kahlo and a Jesus Christ kind of motif.
Yeah.
Like, what are you saying?
That well, it's definitely a sacred heart.
Sacred heart, like everything.
It's sacred heart.
Okay.
And everybody, I think people would recognize, that as such. But I think really what I want to do, because there is a lot about religion and this stuff and making fun of, even when it's not that, there's other stories where like she just kind of has a wacky day. She misses work because she's having hot flashes and wake all night, and then she falls asleep in the morning when she's supposed to be at work. Then here comes the Jehovah's Witness to her house. Here comes the Mormon boys to the house. And that's one of my actually favorite stories. And so she just entertains everybody. She's like, I made a pie. And so let's all eat pie together and stuff. And you think, what are they doing? All these. So it's like kind of, I like to take it out in a, I think that's what fiction does. And that's why fiction is fun, as opposed to say like, memoirs. That you could take stuff to kind of like put in the ridiculous. Like you just take it just a step back on beyond what you would do. Like, will the Jehovah's Witness and the Mormons come in the same day at the same time? No, but in a story, yes. Let's go ahead with that. And what happens in the household? And also her neighbor comes who's like really super new agey, and they're all talking about their things. And I think that I look at religion a lot because I think a lot about patriarchy. And that's kind of what the young adult novel is about. It's a girl who's being raised in a polygamous cult. She's only 14 years old, and she's being forced to marry her cousin. And her brother, she has a twin brother, and he's being thrown out because they try to keep down the number of boys because they want to have lots of girls to marry the dirty old men. And so this is what happens. Like, so I think of patriarchy. Wow. And it is kind of funny because when an
adult narrator in your upcoming YA novel?
She's 14. Okay. 14. And she has to get married when she's 14. So it's a crazy, terrible. And because that's what I was thinking, like, where can I set this where it just has the worst of patriarchy? What can I do? And that was the answer. And it's also kind of realistic in the sense that, of course, places like that have existed in the United States, in the American Southwest, Yeah.
And what year is that fiction novel taking place in?
It's like kind of like contemporary sort of a thing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just so readers know, I've read parts of it and I love it. It's going to be I can't wait till it's out there so we can talk more about it. I don't want to give everything away. But going back to Acts of Contrition really quick, there's this story, Signage, that just fascinated me in the way you set it up. So it's about this woman, Laura, that's at this hotel. And she's thinking about her ex-boyfriend. And then he shows up, right? Along with his family. And he was a little bit, if not abusive to her, a little bit dismissive of her at the very least. Why is that story in the middle of the book? And then talk about how you structured this short story collection. I think for me, the reason I love books so much and why I really get into dive deep into them is I love the idea of where you put a story. And I love the idea of sequencing, kind of like an album. And this book definitely does that in the best kind of way. This book is brilliant in the sense that it kind of takes us on a narrative ride.
So well, I think that what I tried to do is frame it. I like frame.
Mhm.
And so I have the bitten woman is at the beginning, and it's a woman, a grown woman looking back not just at her childhood, but at her great aunt who is looking back at the bitten woman. And she even says, the narrator doesn't have a name and the bitten woman doesn't have a name. And it goes through like what happens, horrifying thing that happens to the bitten woman, how she gets the name the bitten woman. And then the narrator says, this all interested me when I heard the story from my great aunt because I was a bitten girl. And so you get this idea. And then she talks about her kind of terrible, horrifying situation, but who helps her. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to look at there is like what happens to women, who helps or doesn't help, and how that changes the ultimate result, whether you get help or not, right? And so that at the beginning, and then at the end, I wanted it like with this, you must remember this, is where she's actually able to look back at the craziness and almost kind of laugh at it and say, here I am, I'm having a good time, I'm an adult. So those things. All the other stories in the book start out with the narrator talking about being very young, child, and then moving up and up and up and up. So the reason, like something like the things that are in the middle of the book, let's say the stories in the middle, are people are kind of middle aging. They go from young adulthood into middle age, and then by the end of the stories, the second to last story, we have somebody taking care of somebody who has dementia. And I know that I had somebody on. I actually had a story, an article published, and some people ordered the book, which I thought was really nice. Total strangers read the article, and so they ordered my book because they thought, I like this article. And somebody who did that contacted me and said, oh my God, I love this book. It's so realistic. And I went and found the story because about the dementia, because I know somebody with dementia and I had to share it so that we can also, it seems so real. And I said, yeah, unfortunately, I have had this, a very real experience from dementia. And I think what you do is you build on real experiences. But I just wanted that. I wanted them to age so you can see all through the aging process what happens to these women. And even when they're pretty old, they're still getting a lot of crap, it's just like, let them go, that kind of thing. In fact, what I think is so funny that Ruthie made a comment and then where she says, oh my God, I'm heartily sorry for breathing. And I think that is like so exact. That just explains it, doesn't it, Ruthie? It's like, can't do anything, right? You can't do anything. So, yeah.
Well, that's what's so brilliant about your book is it really is about feminism or lack thereof in some ways, and about like kind of women's journey and why feminism is needed, maybe is more like it. And but it doesn't hit you over the head with it. In the end, these are all character studies, right? You focus mostly on one character, and from their frame of reference, we're kind of seeing their world, and that's why I love it so much. There's does is any of the narrators the same person, or they're all different characters, right?
They're all different characters. Yeah, they're all different characters.
Yeah, because I always try to figure that out if there's ever a one person that can show up again. And I like that about it because there's a lot of linked story collections. But what I liked about this story collection is that they're different women, but there's a unifying theme. So
Right,
talk
yeah.
about the line, because we're going to move into talking about your memoir in a little bit, or your collection of essays about the mortality of dogs and humans. Talk about, which is a chapbook, a memoir. We're kind of at Mark Gibbons and Dennis Kalachi from Bamboo Dart Press are kind of turning the chapbook idea on its head, and they're playing with the form a little bit. So this is a chapbook memoir essays. Talk about the line between memoir and fiction and which you prefer. Obviously this is fiction, this is memoir, and you're coming out with the YA fiction. How do you approach them as a writer? There's a lot of writers that listen to this podcast, and which do you prefer as far as genre? Or maybe you don't believe in genre. My friend Samuel Altman we had this conversation for about an hour a couple weekends ago about whether genre matters anymore in the world of autofiction and memoir, and people that blur fiction and memoir, combine them hybrid now. So what's your favorite genre, and what do you think about genre?
I kind of agree with the, like what is genre type of thing, but I will say that this, I haven't lived on a polygamous colony, it's definitely fiction. And that these are fiction, although like I take experiences, like I had a a family not as large as the family in this one. You must remember this, but a big family in a small house with no big toys, and really, let's say, wanting a Barbie dream house, that kind of a thing. And so you're going to take that kind of a thing, but then, like I said, in a very regular sense, I think that fiction has to be engaging in the way that it pushes the limit. And so I just want to make that clear, because I have had people who have read this book and they're like, oh my God, is this you in all these stories? Because, you must be so traumatized. And it's like, no. Okay, just to be clear, no, it is not me in all these stories. And all these like super traumatic things, no, nobody ever bit me all over or whatever. Just those are just things that happen to the characters in the story. And I think that's something
And
that
metaphors in a way, right?
Yeah, people have to like understand that there's a reason for putting that in there, but it's not. They can't always think that that's like every crazy thing is happening to the author, right? That's not the case. And so the author's just trying to like up the ante a little bit to keep you like involved and to make it flow. So I think that that's true. I think as far as memoir, I do write actually some just essays that I've had published, not a book of them or anything, just about things that did feel really crazy to me. And I've had a lot of difficult things in my family over the last 5 years, a lot of death among my family and friends, just that felt like a tidal wave of it. And so what is that like, and where do you go when things like that happen? And so those some of those essays have been published and some of them have not, depending on what they're about. And I think that finally this one with what we're talking about, the mortality of dogs and humans, this is, everything in there is real. So it's nonfiction, and there's no element outside of reality. This is me, and it's my dogs, and it's kind of stuff that happened. But the reason why I wanted to put this thing out, I guess, even though it is this little chapbook, and you're right, it's funny because Mark Gibbons, the publisher, was kind of saying, the pushing the limits of the chapbook. He's saying to me, is this a chapbook? And kind of talking about that, right? And like, well, it is now, right? And it's 70 pages, and it's more of a memoir about dogs. It's not a group of poems. But I think that with the dogs, I had, my dogs were dying, and then died at the same time that my parents were dying. And then I thought of the difference between what it's like to care for parents who are dying, what it's like to care for dogs who are dying. But I wanted it to be an uplifting thing, and I wanted it to be about for especially, I have so many friends that have dogs. I mean, I have lots of dog-loving friends, and who have one or even more dogs. And a lot of them had to put the dogs down. And then they sometimes will say to me, or even I'll see it on Facebook or whatever, oh, I can't get another dog, or that was 2 years ago. And I can't believe sometimes, I can't do this because it would dishonor my dog, or I can't stop thinking about my dog. It was the best dog ever. And that's true. That's the way we feel, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But really, for everybody's sake, you get another dog or another 2 dogs. If you lost 2 dogs like I did, I got 2 dogs. They will remind you of your past dogs. Even though they have different personalities, your past dogs are sort of like alive in them. So I wanted to go through like what the process was, like about what you have to do when you're putting a dog down, and how much I trusted my vet, because they would say, oh, you'll know. Well, you don't know. And a lot of times you try to fool yourself, right? Even on the day, Fletcher, on the day that he was going to be put down, and I made all the arrangements in advance because I didn't think I could do it, but it's like paid in advance and made an appointment in advance. And then I said, I'll wait for my son to come down here because he wants to be here, all these kinds of things. Then I'll be able to do it. And he was really actually, bad off. He really was. But that morning he got up and he could kind of move a little better than the day he did before. So I'm like, oh, maybe I should cancel, right? Because you just want so badly not to be that place. And so you kind of need that other thing with the vet to say, when you take him and the vet says, oh my God, let's look how slim he is.
I personally don't think you ever know if you're making the right call. And you and I have talked about what happened with my Frodo, who I had for 15 beautiful years. He was a black and white Shih Tzu, one of my best friends in life. And I got him after my cat was killed by a bobcat, my cat, Leopold Bloom. And, but Frodo was my first real dog that I ever owned. And he went downhill so rapidly that it was literally one morning of 7 seizures, and me having to make the call within literally 1 hour, 2 hours, and my husband being at work, my vet being in Arizona, who's one of our best friends, and then me working with the vet on the phone, Chris, Dr. Berg in Rancho, and then him talking to the vet there, and me watching my dog be intubated and deciding that it was too much for Frodo. And I feel blessed, not because I let him go, because I still wonder, could he have, we think he had a brain tumor, so I think I made the right call, and I didn't want him to suffer. But when we put him down, and like I said, I had to make the decision really quick. The vet, after they did the syringe, and he stopped breathing, they let me hold him for an hour, and they wrapped him in a brown fur blanket, and he looked, and his name was Frodo, and he looked like a little hobbit.
Yeah.
And I would never say that I saw his soul leave his body, but I felt it. And it wasn't when they said he stopped breathing. It was after. It was when I was holding him and talking to him, and telling him how much I loved him and how much he meant to me.
I know.
When I read the story about Fletcher, I was like, you wrote this story for people like me, that we need to feel comforted that we made the right call and that we did the right thing, and that it's never easy, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I like how you encourage people to get another dog, because I do believe that.
Yeah. And I have, and right away, I went after Zany. Fletcher and Zany died like 2 years apart, and they were actually 2 years in age difference. So they were both Fletcher. Yeah. So Fletcher was just under 16, but he was a big dog. He was a 70-pound dog. So it was a good, solid life. And Fletcher was a beautiful runner. And that's part of what this is about. He was a runner. He was a hiker. And part of the story is about, the other thing about dogs is that
golden retriever, or what was his
she
breed?
is no, she's a Labrador retriever. And actually she had this looks just like her. A friend of mine, her name is Laura Wedson DeClos. She's an artist, and she's taken up watercolor recently. She took it up during the pandemic, and she's already really good. And she painted this picture of Zany. And it's from a picture of Zany. She was outside, so she just put a little thing on her. But it reminds me so much of Zany, and so that was really nice. And I think, hold on a second, I have a Fletcher.
Hold on, I'm going to do one thing too.
I'll show you guys a picture of Fletcher. If I can get him in there. Yeah, there he is. Yeah. Because look at that. He's like, I'm so cute.
That's Manta. This is Frodo's little brother.
Frodo's little brother, yeah.
Every day for 13 years. I meet Frodo. He just wanted to say hi to you. Show the picture of Fletcher.
I know. So this is just Fletcher's face. You can see, and the reason why I say is that in the book, I talk about how Fletcher kind of looks a little bit like a wolf. Yeah. And so it was kind of nice, because he would he was actually a really nice dog, but he looked kind of scary. And so when I would run and things like that, at the time I had run marathons and things, and I would take Fletcher out, and we would just run miles and miles. Fletcher was never quit. My vet used to call him the Olympic athlete. And so he could run 20 miles, and then he would be like, I could go some more, Mom. And he was like just this beautiful wolfish dog. And I liked it too, because when I would hike in like lonely areas or whatever, he had that look like she's walking a wolf. And so like men, they wouldn't be like, oh, they kind of walk around me, right? And so I'll kind of talk about that a little bit today when I read about these dogs. But they were just a lot of fun.
Read it. And I read this sentence once that said, we learn how to grieve through the death of our pets, because they do have such a shorter lifespan than us, and it's the way we learn to grieve. Talk about how, because I had this happen when Frodo passed. It brought up all my dad's stuff, and my dad passing, and my father-in-law passing, and my brother-in-law passing, and you've had a lot of death in your life. Talk about that line between the mortality of dogs and humans. That's the title of your book. What is that line? Is it the same experience? I mean, for me, it is in some ways. I have to say, losing my dog was in some ways not as hard as losing my dad, but very similar in the depression aspect.
I think in the depression aspect, it is very similar, because one thing about dogs, I know a lot of people say their dogs are exactly like the people in their family. I would not say that. I really wouldn't. But I would say they are really meaningful. They have created a lot of meaning in my life. and even a lot of spiritual meaning, because things that I loved to do, I was able to do because I had the dog and I felt comfortable. And like, oh, April Waddle, like there. Yeah, it's companion and guardian in the wilderness. And that option of going out in the wilderness and not having to depend on somebody else to be your hiking buddy or whatever, just to get out and to feel this kind of presence, this spiritual thing. And the dog adds to that. I think dogs' relationships are easier than people relationships, of course, because we're so complicated, right? With each other, we're complicated. The dog just loves you, and you just love the dog, and they just do crazy shit, and you just love them anyway, and then they just love you, even if you're like having an imperfect day. They're just like, you come home, and it's like, oh my God, there she is. They even think that you were God or something.
Right, you say that right before this podcast. I had taken Chewbacca outside, and it's so humid, and there's so many flies right now, and I'm like, Julie, get in the house. You're letting flies in. And I like screamed at him, and he shook a little. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like being imperfect with him, but then he immediately forgives me when I give him a little piece of ham. It's like they forget. And I mean, it's not like you can traumatize a dog over and over. They will not forget.
Mm-hmm.
But with the little indiscretions about raising your voice or tone or something with a dog, I mean, they're just so forgiving. And I personally believe that Chewbacca understands exactly. Like the other day, I was saying something. I swear to gosh, the dog looked at me like side eye, and my husband said, "He knows what you're saying about him." And I was like, "I know. Is that weird?" Like, I don't know. There's a psychic bond that I have with my dogs. I wouldn't say it's like a human connection. I think it's like a spiritual connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think too, even when I'll make an argument for a very ordinary dog, and say like I read a lot of people have read what is it, chemistry, lessons in chemistry. It's a big, huge bestseller over many, many months. I think it's probably still on New York Times bestseller list. And in there, there's a point of view character who's a dog, and this dog is like Einstein. I think has developed the theory of relativity or something. It's so smart, and it understands everybody's mind and soul, and it saves people from a bomb threat. I mean, it does like absolutely everything. And I as much as I like dogs, I thought, I don't know. And I think there's a good argument to be made for like the ordinary kind of dog that people have with its ordinary foibles. You will still get, your dog doesn't have to be more genius than you are. It doesn't have to be Lassie telling us that Timothy's in the well, right? It just has to love you. And that is what a dog does. And that kind of makes, and immediately when you go through death, that actually makes it easier too, because your relationship with the dog is clear, right? When you're dealing with the death sometimes of family members, a lot of the stuff bubbles up, right? The stuff that's never going to be fixed, the stuff that you're never going to be able to really talk about openly because of the blockade against certain kinds of things. So that's, I think, what makes it hard with people. And then also there's elements of people that you can't do anything about. Like, let's say, when they get really old and really sick and you're still having to get a bath and everything hurts them, or they don't want to bathe, they've just kind of lost it. Like a dog, like when Zany, the last time she had a bath, she was like so anxious and crazy. It was an awful situation that's in this book. She kind of pooped all over the floor of the place. And I just thought, that's it. She never has to have another bath, right?
Aww.
That's it. And so you can do that with a dog. But then people, it's kind of bad because you have to push people into things that they don't want to do, and then when they're dying and they're in a lot of pain, there's no way out of that pain. You're watching them suffer in a way that I think you wouldn't watch an animal suffer. And it's an interesting question to ask ourselves, that one.
It is when you think about euthanasia and stuff. But one of my favorite memoirists is Carolyn Knapp, at KNAPP. She wrote a book called Drinking a Love Story. She won a big awards for her journalism. She was an essayist. She wrote a column. But she wrote this book that I love called Pack of Two, The Intricate Bond Between People and Dogs. And that's what your book kind of linked with me, that idea that there is this bond, that they can kind of be your companion sometimes in a way people cannot, right? And then that idea, like you said, about watching your people in your family pass, and then not being able to alleviate their suffering, but being able to make the choice with the dog. It does Like, I remember when I made my confirmation in San Francisco at St. John of God, and I had to take all these classes because I made my first communion and then kind of fell out of the Catholic Church. When my husband was in dental school in San Francisco, I loved the church out there. I don't go to church anymore, but back then I found a really liberal, humanitarian, service-based church that I would go to, and the average age was 60. And I had to take these classes to make my confirmation there. And I got into this argument with this guy about whether dogs go to heaven and cats, whether dogs and cats go to heaven. And we really got into it, like we were screaming at each other. By the end, to the point where the nun or whatever had to tell us to stop talking about, agree to disagree. But what do you think? Do you think dogs and cats go to heaven? If you believe in heaven, or like,
Well,
is there
I don't. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about traditional heaven. I kind of as far I'm an interesting personal religion because I wrote all this funny stuff. But I am a believer. I really am.
so much?
I'm not an atheist. I'm not agnostic. I do believe, and I think that of afterlife. And part of the thing is, a lot of people that have died that I know, I have felt their presence, not continuously, only in the couple of days after they died. Like they're kind of making sure that there's a goodbye and that we're okay. And then that's it. I tell you what, I know the Catholic Church says, animals, they don't go. It's only for people. But it's hard for me to conceptualize whatever heaven is. It's very difficult for me to conceptualize heaven without dogs. I mean, what in the heck is that about? Like, come on, man, give me that dog. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to my twin sister Jackie earlier about that idea, earlier today, in fact, and I said, I really do believe in, even though it may not make sense as a punk rock public defender, kind of F the man, that I even buy into religion or the institution at all, but I love the community of church. When people say peace be with you in church, I always start crying. I can't help it. There's something about the community building of church that I have always loved, and my mom raised me that way to love it. But that concept of heaven or whatever you want to call it, I can't really conceptualize it without dogs either. And I kind of just think we're all energy and all kind of stick around at least for a while, maybe are reincarnated to something else or to someone else or to something else. But I mean, I do think it's an interesting question. If you love dogs so much, and if you, let's say there is a pearly gate, and you get there, and you're like, "Where's my dog?"
Okay, I'm here. In fact, where are all my dogs? Like, can't you just see it? The whole troop. I mean, think of over a lifetime. We had dogs when I was a kid too. A lot, many.
I have all my.
I could see just all of them, the whole troop of them. Let's have them. We really, really fun. And David Stone, I see on the comments, David Stone says amen. So I'm like, yay, David, because I think he's a dog lover too. He has dogs and cats.
Well, yeah, and I don't really like to talk about religion much, but I would say this, that I'm not ashamed of saying I do believe in a higher power. I don't know if I would call it God or a goddess or the universe, but it's kind of uncool to say I'm a believer, but I am too, and it's kind of cool. Yeah, it's kind of uncool and cool. I mean, it doesn't really matter what people think about it, but I do think it's interesting. I think it's interesting to think about these dogs. And could you read a piece from the Mortality of Dogs and Humans, just so everyone can hear what I mean? This is everyone. I'm going to put the link in the comments. Please buy this book. They're a steal at $8. A steal, let me tell you. They're not making a lot of money on these. They do it for the love of it, of the written word. Bamboo Dart Press. It's an amalgam of a book press and a punk rock, label. And Mark Gibbons and Dennis Kalachi have put together a whole stable of writers that you really need to check out. Some of the best writers from the area, and from even not in the area. There's some international writers, and Peter Church is from New York that's on the label. But check Bamboo Dart Press out. So Victoria, I'm going to put that link in the comments while you're reading.
Okay, thanks. And I think I'll just read a little tiny section, you guys. This just very quickly. I think you've already heard what it's about, and it is looking at how do we decide when to put the dog down and what the dog means to us. And as I said, Fletcher was a runner. At the time that I got Fletcher, I was running marathons, actually jogging marathons, to be one of the truth. I'm not a very good runner. but jogging marathons, and he trained with me. And that was another thing in terms of the difference between a person and a dog, was like, who could go with me for 20 miles? Well, Fletcher. No one I knew was going to do that. So he was my constant companion in that way, in so many ways. And he was a beautiful, beautiful runner. And so, though the book is about putting the dogs down and what that was like and how we got through it, was also about the beauty of having dogs in life, and particularly with these bigger dogs being outside. So I just want to read two little parts about being outside with dogs. Okay. So, on our regular hikes into the local hills, I sought emptiness and peace. Fletcher and Zany found a thriving community of creatures, a heaven of scents to track, lizards and butterflies to snap at, and bugs to investigate. It was a virtual doggy activity center of the best sort. We never saw the mountain lions we were warned about in the signage at all the entrances. We did, however, see many deer, squirrels, chipmunks on a regular basis, as well as the occasional skunk, rattlesnake, tarantula, and bobcat. The hills were also the home of the bears that entered our neighborhood, but they were more circumspect in midday, and sighting them was rare. I liked always to have the dogs with me, partly because I would often come across single men in a lonely patch of the trail. I imagined each of these men was there for his own nature fix, but then I was female, and alone would have been easy prey. The two big dogs often caused men to take a wide path around me. One day, as we hiked an isolated trail away from the main loop, we turned a corner, coming around a vast toyon bush to stand face to face with a bear. I only had time to think, oh shit, before the bear turned and took off in the opposite direction. I would say bolted, but a big lumbering animal doesn't bolt exactly. As it bounded away, the undulating edge of its black fur glistened in the sunlight, shedding quicksilver drops in its rays. I was transfixed. Even the dogs were silent and still, alert, a ridge of fur, head to tail, down each of their backs. Over the years, I've come to understand that by attending to the pups, I attended to myself in ways I wouldn't have otherwise. A red-tailed hawk would fly overhead, singular in the sky, which was bright blue, puffy clouded, serene. The air was pleasant in fall and spring, hot for long summers, when the shade was often perfect. I looked up to see the tiny purple flowers of the lantana, the green hedge, the roses in bloom, red, pink, and sunset hues. Enormous beauty surrounded me. All this felt like grace, and I was lucky each day I was with them.
Awesome. So awesome. That voice. Oh, oh, so good. So good. Mm. Everyone get this book, The Mortality of Dogs and Humans, on Bamboo Dart Press by Victoria Waddle. Okay, so let's move to the book giveaway. We're going to give a copy of Acts of Contrition away, right?
Both. We could do one of each.
Oh,
Do you have two questions to ask
people? I do. So
I think you always have good literary questions. Who knows their authors? Who knows their famous authors?
Yeah. So we'll go into that in a minute, but I do want to say that talk about the publishing process really quick before we go into the book giveaway. Talk about how Acts of Contrition came to publishing, and then how The Mortality of Dogs and Humans came to publishing, and then talk about your Inlandia journey and how you submitted that book and it got picked up for publication as well.
Okay. Well, I don't have too much to say about these two books because they just basically published. I thought that I'd seen other things from Los Nietos Press that I liked. One of the things that I really enjoyed, oh God, I can't now, of course the title slips my mind, but May did her book on the escape from Vietnam, from the communist regime. And it was very compelling.
Behind the Red Curtain by Hong.
Yeah, Behind the Red Curtain, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And she was, it was a memoir, so it's like something completely different. But I looked and they saw that they did short work, and that they also did people like in inland Southern California, which was kind of this thing. And some of these stories here take place. Actually, some take place at the beach. One's in Santa Barbara. I mean, it says right there, it's in Santa Barbara. But inland California, nowhere is in these kind of hills and things like that. And so I thought, well, maybe it'd be a good fit. And so I sent it there, and they said, yeah, it's a good fit. So that was like handy. And then we did this. One thing I do want to tell you though, that's kind of it's not a funny story, but I'll just tell you as far as like a publishing story, a wacky thing that happened. It's almost like I made this up. This almost sounds like fiction, but it's not. It's true. This had been ready to go. It was we were working on it at the same time that both of my parents were very ill and dying, and it was also the pandemic. And as you guys probably remember, at that time, like if somebody was dying, they throw them in the hospital, and then you couldn't go see them. Or if they were in a nursing home, they couldn't have any visitors, and they would completely die alone. Well, we were like, my sisters and I, my sister Lisa and Kathy, like, oh, we can't have that. And so my sister Kathy, who's pretty, I think, powerful, good personality. Both my sisters, everybody in my family has good, powerful personality, but they kind of got in there and just said, no, we're not going to allow this. And my parents were in assisted living, which is just like they give you meals and stuff, right? They distribute your medicine. They would help my mom take a shower. My mom had dementia, and that was it. But my mom needed a lot of care because of her dementia, way more care than you could get in that facility. And so my sisters and I were helping to provide that care. My dad was dying. My mom would end up dying 7 months after my dad. So we just registered as self-employed caretakers so that we could get in. And I think we were the only relatives of anybody in the entire building. Yeah, right? That were in there. And so we could get in every day, and they would take our temperature every time we came in. As long as the temperature was good, off we would go. And so we were able to take care of them. Well, this is all going on. Well, this is the book, where we're trying to go through the book and do the edits and things like that. And so it was a crazy time for me. And I think having the book helped me, because I thought, here's something positive. I'm birthing something into the world, right? While my parents are dying. And so my dad died, and then my mom died. And so my mom, at that time also, you couldn't have like a regular funeral because of the pandemic. But so my parents were their ashes were buried in the a national cemetery, Miramar, in San Diego. And they said, well, you can have this like outdoor. So you can have it outdoor. They have a little outdoor thing. It's a maximum, I think it was 15 minutes, maximum of 25 people, which in our family, that's like the close family, because they're a big family, right? So just that, and wearing a mask outside, blah, blah, blah. So here we go. So on March 15th, 2001 was my launch date for my book. Well, as it turned out, that was actually my mother's like funeral date. Okay.
Wow.
So we're standing outside.
So 2021?
Yeah. And so the Ides of March 2021, I should have known, right? Ides of March. And so we go out there and we're standing outside. And this is in a drought year. If you guys remember, 2021, it didn't rain at all, except that one day. And it poured and it gushed like it was like a hurricane. And so it's just this over thing outside, and all this rain is coming sideways through the whole thing. And we were getting completely just soaked, and we couldn't sit down on the benches because they were completely soaked. And I was just thinking, oh my God, I cannot believe this. My mother's probably up there in heaven, just like laughing her head off. And this is supposed to be my book launch day. And instead of like, oh, celebrating my book, I want to have like a cake, right? With a picture of the book on the cake, and we were going to cut in the family, and oh, we're going to do this. Instead, we're standing out here in this like rain and hailstorm and stuff like that. So I thought, well, that's the way my life goes right now. And so that's kind of a funny way that one was launched.
Wow.
Yeah, it was nuts. And then this one, the Mortality of Dogs and Humans, I sent it and I said, well, because my parents were dying and died, and I thought, and then the dogs died, I just wanted to write a little bit about that grief. And as it turned out, it was like I thought it would be something that would be helpful with other people. But I didn't want to write a whole book about the dogs or anything. I really didn't. I thought this was enough. I said what I wanted to say. And so I said, Mark Givens, what do you think? And he's like, yeah. And again, he was kind of like I said before, is that a chapbook? But yeah, it's a chapbook if we make it a chapbook, And so so that's what we did. So it's kind of like you said, he's pushing the boundaries, which I think is very, very cool. And we were able to have that there. On the Inlandia one, they have a anonymous process.
A lot of people think that some of this stuff is magic, and some of it is. I would say that finding a press and all that, and it's your connections and it's the literary community that you're part of. But there is actually within Landia Institute, there's a blind submission process that you submitted your book to. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, it's a yeah, so that has no identifying information on it at all or anything like that. And then they have different readers read it and just make a call, do we want to publish this or don't we? And they decided to. So I was really excited about that because it's a teen, it's a YA, but it's a very hard hitting one. I think some very difficult things happen in this community. And I felt, I did send it out to like a few agents, but they really like this, but she used to have a boyfriend. And I thought, I think you're missing, this is about a girl who's being forced to marry in a polygamous cult. And so not everything is teen romance. I know teen romance is really popular, but that's not what we're talking about here. So I wanted to go with somebody who honored the project, if you know what I mean. Like, right?
I've read the book and it's brilliant. And I don't want to give too much away about it. And I want to have you on when that book comes out. But I do have to say this. It is not your typical YA. It's a lot more than that, I think. When we think YA, we think kind of superficial sometimes and blah, blah. But the best YA books like Gabby, A Girl in Pieces, and Aristotle and Dante, the Aristotle and Dante 2 books that came out. Those books deal with larger cultural issues in the zeitgeist and really resonate. And I think your book is going to. And I know it's untitled because you're working on the title a little bit right now. You had a title, you switched it up because of another media thing that came out that had the similar title. So as soon as it comes out, we are definitely going to market it. Let's do the giveaway really quick because we have about 5 minutes. For the Mortality of Dogs and Humans book, I'm going to do a pretty easy trivia question. Name the author who wrote Call of the Wild. And the first person who puts that in the comments will win the Mortality of Dogs and Humans. And that's about a dog, obviously. And then for Acts of Contrition, and the same person, David Stone, you won it. So David Stone just won the Mortality of Dogs and Humans. And so for the next question, for Acts of Contrition, it really does have a very strong religious component. So for me, one of my favorite writers is an Irish writer who wrote a lot about the Catholic Church. And he wrote a short story collection called Dubliners, and he won. But Dave Stone, please put that author's name. He's a very famous Irish writer, postmodernist, modernist era, who wrote the collection Dubliners, which contains a story called Araby, which is one of my favorite short stories of all time. And so if someone puts that in the comments, then you will win Acts of Contrition, signed by Victoria Waddle and David Stone. You just won the Mortality of Dogs and Humans. So congratulations.
Congratulations.
Yay. These are both great books. I have to say, for people listening in that aren't watching live, please go to the Los Nietos, LOSNIETOS Press website and buy Acts of Contrition. It's also a steal. It's $16. And then Mortality of Dogs and Humans can be found on bamboo.press.com. And these are $8 chapbooks. You can actually get a subscription through Bamboo Dart and get a number of books. And I would recommend doing that. So I love all of their authors. They have my friend Emily Fernandez came out with a book of poetry that's very well done too. And I just think that they're finding writers and amplifying voices that need to be amplified. So we have, Ruthie Marlene just won Acts of Contrition. Woo! You will get a signed copy of this, Ruthie. James Joyce was the answer. He wrote Dubliners. He also wrote Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. And, of course, Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake. All some of my favorite novels. I've studied under a Joyce scholar at UCR named Kim Devlin. So I love me some Joyce. So I just want to say this has been awesome to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me.
I do want to give a shout out. In 2 weeks, we're going to have Elsa Valmidiano on. She's a Filipino writer who just wrote a beautiful book, and I will put that on my Facebook page with more information. And then I want to urge everyone to follow us on Apple Podcasts. We're really trying to grow this, and I'm trying to really promote the authors that come on. I have some ideas for doing maybe a book club. So if anyone has any ideas about how to grow this podcast and you want to be involved, just send me a message. We have some people here that I want to shout out. Lauren Gibbon Gillespie. Hi, Aunt.
Hi, Lauren. She's my goddaughter. My sister, yeah, so yeah.
Oh, and your sister is here,
Yeah, it's my sister going across. Yeah,
Elizabeth. She said,
she was
"Great."
one of the people who was like did the care of my parents. Very, yeah,
Aw.
she's a great person. I call her the bulldog because she's like she gets stuff done. It's like you can't tell her no. She's very
Yeah,
good. Thank you,
and Lauren is here as well. We know David and Ruthie
Laura.
are here. Ruthie just won Acts of Contrition. Lauren, well done.
Laura Winston. She did
Oh,
this. This is her artwork.
oh, she's the
Yes,
artist.
yeah.
It's
So this
so
is yeah, she's an
beautiful,
artist. Yeah,
Laura.
so beautiful. Yes,
Thank you for
it really is.
letting her use
I
it.
have this. I have a regular computer right here, so I can't I can't turn it around or whatever. But that painting I have on the wall directly behind me, so that whenever I come in this room and work, I get to see Zany. So it's really sweet.
Oh, okay. So just really quick, I do want to talk about your Substack. We'll go 5 minutes over. What is the Substack that you just created? Be a Cactus. What do you publish on there? How can people find you? And do you have any upcoming events or readings you want to talk about? Talk to us about
Oh, you know what? I do have a couple of things that I hope people can just sit here for 1 minute because I want to say the Substack is it's almost like a blog, but it's just a community where writers and stuff are. And I think that it's way more comfortable than typical social media that people have gone on to just seem to like hate each other or whatever. This is all like really genuine community. And I think that's like it. I like it. So I have a thing, it's just called Be a Cactus. And the idea of Be a Cactus is that, you can bloom beautifully, but you also sometimes have to be a little prickly to keep your boundaries, right? These are my boundaries. I got these little stickers out, don't you and baby. Because I think that's a thing that I have had a hard time learning in life. I'm still learning it. So that's why it's called Be a Cactus.
Yeah.
And I have some things on there, and I do put it out on Sundays. And so this Sunday I'll put some links to some of the things that I'm talking about. So I had a couple things going on there. A couple upcoming things are that on somebody's Substack magazine, it's called The Books That Made Us. I'm going to have an article in there about a book that made me when I was 12 years old, which was Little Women.
Why? Oh my God.
Yeah,
I'm a Little Women fanatic. Oh my God.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you're gonna like this one because, like, why did I like that? And I'm looking at it as not just a moral tale, but as a proto-feminist book and what it meant. Like that. So going on to that and creativity. Yeah, creativity. She's everybody's favorite. She was my favorite. And then another big project.
Personally think Joe from Facts of Life is named after Joe in Little Women. I've never.
Oh, okay.
But I always had this idea that Joel Polnicek from Facts of Life was named Joe after the Little Woman character Joe. Yeah.
Maybe right. I never thought of that, but yeah, actually.
Yeah, because she's kind of,
Now that you said it, that makes sense, right? Also, we're having in Landia. I used to be the managing editor for 5 years, and then I stopped doing that. And Erin McSweeney is the managing editor now, and we had talked about having a special issue about libraries and librarians because librarians are going through so much right now. And so special issue is really fun. Librarians could submit on any topic. And then other people who are not librarians could only submit work about librarians or libraries. And so that's all been chosen. Erin is putting the issue together.
Erin McSweeney. Yeah,
Eric McSweeney. And I was the editor of just the issue itself. And I wrote a long article about empathy, how reading, like banning books is banning empathy. That's actually what's going on. But I talked about one book. It's kind of different than anybody else's article. I talked about one book that I personally withdrew from my collection, and I go through why and the reviews so that you can see how hard it is to withdraw a book. You can't just like go take 2,000 books off and say, we'll put them back later after we read them, because that's never going to happen. That's a ploy to keep books off the shelf. And so I think it's a really interesting article, and I will when it comes up in September, put a link to it, but all that could be in the Substack. So if people go to Be a Cactus on victoria.substack.com, I will link out the last few projects that I've had that have been published like in online, but not in books. And then also when those come up, I'll be sure to give the links. I'm really excited about the library project.
Oh, the library issue. I know Alan Kalachi, hopefully he put something in there. He's a librarian in Upland. I actually reprinted a story from my memoir about the Ontario Library. They're reprinting it in that anthology. I think it's going to be, it's a fascinating idea to base a whole issue around librarians telling their stories and other people telling stories about libraries and librarians, right? And I was just saying today, No, yesterday we had to do a site visit out in Palm Springs and we're driving with everyone. So I'm kind of talking. And I was saying that my dream job would be to be a librarian. I mean, to be surrounded by books. It just seems like, in some ways, just this beautiful occupation. But I'm sure in other ways, it's very hard. Like, no job is easy, right?
Yeah,
You're
that's
trying
true.
to,
There's always that. But just being a school librarian, I think one of the fun things is that you're surrounded by books, but you're surrounded by teens, Um,
uh,
and if you care about, teens and kids and stuff, and just putting the right book in the right hands, I mean, a lot of school libraries also, you're trying to teach people elementary research, like, right,
yeah.
how to find resources that are trustworthy, reliable, which is really important in this day and age, I must say. And so there's that aspect, but there's also the book aspect, which is like super, super fun. So, yeah.
Well, one of my best friends in law school, Tiffany Willis, died recently. My roommate in law school, and she was the librarian at a law school in LA. And she was just such a special person, and she was the only person that I had known before I met all my writing friends that really loved books the way I loved books. And it was just amazing that she was a corporate lawyer, and she went and got her library degree at UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to USC for law school, and I would always think, like, that's her perfect job, was to be a librarian, even at a law school. And I also want to talk about your book reviews just really quick. Where can people find those? I have to tell everyone, Victoria Waddle is so humble, but she's such a good reviewer, and she really supports other writers through her reviews. Where can people find your book reviews?
I have a lot of YA book reviews. So again, YA means young adult, right? Things for teens or adult books that teens would also like. It's called schoollibrarylady.com. So it's all like one word, just spelled completely out, schoollibrarylady.com. Tons of book reviews there. And then I have a website that's just victoriawaddle.com, and it has some review of more adult books. There are lots of adult books actually in the school library one, but they have to have some teen appeal, or I didn't put them on there. Yeah.
Well, thank you
And
for
lots of
everything
team
you do. Thank you for all your writing, for all your books. When your new book comes out, you got to come back on and promote that. I want everyone thank you, Victoria, who's listening in, to go get a copy of The Mortality of Dogs and Humans, get a copy of Acts of Contrition, which is a short story collection. And for the people who won, just send me a message with your address and I'll forward it on to Victoria. I want to thank everyone for listening. And everyone is so proud of you. You have so many people that adore you. And
well, then I'm going to take that away. That's going to be my takeaway. Okay,
yeah, you are. You're loved. So I just want to thank you for coming on and for being a wonderful person, professor, teacher. You also teach for Inlandia. So if anyone wanted to take a class with Victoria, just check out the Inlandia website. And she does teach classes as well for Inlandia and other people. So check that out. And my sister Jackie, my twin, has taken a class with Victoria and just adores her as a facilitator teacher. Okay, so thank you so much. Everyone have a great night. And listen in on Apple Podcasts. Please follow us. Bye, everyone.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Thank you.